Now, as lawmakers in Capitol Hill continue to push for a war powers resolution, U.S. and Israeli strikes across Iran are intensifying. And while the White House says there are no plans at this time for U.S. boots on the ground in Iran, President Trump has not ruled it out. And joining us this morning to discuss the broader ramifications of this conflict, Professor Seth Weinberger, an expert on Middle East policy from the University of Puget Sound, is back with us this morning. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me back on.
All right, so Democrats in Congress now calling for a war powers resolution to have a say in the action being taken in the Middle East, and some saying that they are just pushing for the administration to abide by the Constitution. Now, do you feel that this is a constitutional issue?
Personally, no, I don't. So the question is that the Constitution gives the power to declare war to Congress. But the question then really is, well, what's war? And what is it that Congress is supposed to control? The administration's position, and here I'm not just talking about the Trump administration, but going back to the Obama administration and even before that, the administration's position is generally war is something beyond just the United States shooting at another country. War is sort of long, prolonged hostilities involving ground troops, something like that, something like the Vietnam War, or the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, in which then Congress would be asked for some sort of authorization. But repeatedly, in recent history, presidents have treated even long sustained airstrikes as levels of conflict that are below what we would call a war, and therefore not triggering the constitutional requirement for congressional involvement. I tend to be sort of take that position, and I think that this is really, at least where we are now, not a constitutional question at this moment.
Okay, one of the big questions is, why are we there? Now, Israel has an obvious axe to grind with Iran. What is the end game for the U.S.? They say it's about nukes, among other things, but could it really be about the Strait of Hormuz, about the oil?
Yeah, so I think it's about a bunch of different things that have all sort of come together at the same moment. I think the nuclear issue is a big one, and it's going to be really hard to dismantle that Iranian nuclear program, especially after President Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal that President Obama had reached with Iran. I also, though, think it's about the growing missile threat. I think one of the things we're seeing about modern warfare is that it's increasingly becoming sort of a numbers game, right? That states, like we're seeing this with Russia against Ukraine, are just able to launch huge numbers of relatively cheap missiles and drones, which take very expensive interceptors. And so, we're hearing people worry about whether or not the United States is going to run out of the Patriot missiles or the THAAD missiles that it needs to shoot down these incoming projectiles from Iran. And the longer Iran was allowed to build missiles and build drones, the more it would have, and then that balance would begin to shift towards Iran. The Straits of Hormuz, of course, are important. I think Iran has now essentially closed or sort of threatened all ships moving through the Straits of Hormuz, which in time is going to have a pretty significant impact on the global economy. It's a little too soon for us to have really seen that impact yet, but it's coming. Especially Qatar has now shut off their liquefied natural gas project. That's going to have a pretty significant impact. And so I think what you have is a bunch of different issues, not to mention, I think Trump yesterday or 2 days ago said something about Iran's attempt to assassinate him. You have a lot of different issues that are coming together at the same time that sort of made this moment, at least in the United States' perspective, the right moment to attack.
Trump telling Axios this morning that he must be involved in the selection of Iran's next leader. He calls Khamenei's son an unacceptable pick. And the president was asked what he viewed as the worst case scenario moving forward in Iran. And Trump said it would be a leader, quote, as bad as the late supreme leader. What do you think is the worst case scenario in Iran for the U.S.?
Yeah, it's definitely not sort of the continuation of the Iranian regime. We know what that looks like. It's not great, but it's not the worst case. I think the worst case scenario is actually something that we're maybe seeing starting to unfold now, is reports of the United States and Israel willing to support a sort of Kurdish insurgency in the northwest of Iran. Iran is only about 50% Persian, and the rest of the country is various ethnic minorities. The Kurds are about 10% of the population of Iran. But they're not going to be able to build, I think, a broad base of political support to replace the Iranian government. So if there is, in fact, a Kurdish insurgency, I think the most likely outcome of that is maybe the splintering of the Iranian state. That would be, I think, the worst case scenario, because you would have something that looks like what's going on in northern Africa with the collapse of the Libyan regime that then led to a civil war in Libya and then led to the expansion of sort of ISIS's presence in northwest Africa, in a much more volatile and important region of the world, in the Middle East. And if you have Iran falling apart, you're going to have ISIS and Al Qaeda coming in. You're going to have Kurds and Russians and all these different people trying to stabilize the situation. That, I think, would be the worst case. And at least there are reports that that's sort of what the United States and Israel are pushing for. Reports that they're starting to arm these Kurdish groups and maybe offering air support. To me, that's the worst case scenario, is an Iran that falls apart into a civil war and then splinters into sort of ethnic violence.
And Hezbollah would probably have a say in that as well. So is a civil war inevitable, do you think?
No, it's not inevitable. I think the Iranian state is showing that it's relatively resilient. It hasn't fallen apart despite the elimination of 40 some of its leading politicians and military officials. But the thing that would most likely make that happen would be a U.S.-funded, supported Kurdish insurgency. So I don't think it's inevitable, but it's certainly a possibility if the U.S. continues down at least what is being continues down this route of what's being suggested at the moment.
Professor Seth Weinberger from the University of Puget Sound, really great perspective again. And I didn't get to all my questions again, so we're going to have you back, and we'll discuss more, because there's a lot to discuss.
Happy to come back. There's so much to talk about.
Absolutely.
So thanks very much for having me back on.
Professor Weinberger, thank you.